Clara Sanchez cautiously entered the office of her boss, Daniel Salazar. At that moment, everything seemed to be going normally, but there was something that Clara needed to tell her, something important. With a mixture of nerves and determination, he approached his boss's desk, who looked up from his papers, noticing that something in his expression was not the same as usual. "All right, Clara," asked Daniel, trying to read her face. Clara sat across from him, taking a deep breath before saying what she had come to share. "There's something I need to tell you. I'm expecting a baby," she said, avoiding looking away. Daniel stood still for a moment, processing the news. It wasn't a total surprise, but the idea that Clara was expecting changed the dynamics of everything, especially considering her job. "Pregnant?" repeated Daniel, watching Clara carefully. "Since when?" "I just found out yesterday. I'm still taking it in," Clara replied, feeling the weight of the news on her shoulders. "I don't know how all this will change, or how it will affect my work here." Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair, thoughtful. Although his expression didn't show panic, there was a spark of concern in his gaze. "I understand, but the first thing is that you feel good, Clara. You don't have to worry about work right now." Clara felt a little calmer when she heard those words, but she couldn't help but feel lost. "That's what worries me the most, Daniel. How am I going to balance this with everything else? My life is about to take a very big turn." "I know, and it's natural to feel that way," Daniel replied, looking at Clara with understanding. "The important thing is that you make the decisions you need to be well. Here we can talk about how to organize things as you need, but your health and well-being should be the priority." Clara nodded slowly, feeling that, at least, she was not alone in that vulnerable moment. Although I didn't have all the answers, I felt like I had taken the first step by sharing that part of her life with him. "Thank you, Daniel," Clara said gratefully. "I really appreciate your support." Days later, Clara Sanchez began to feel the weight of the decision she had made. As the time approached to make the changes in her professional and personal life, her mind kept revolving around what the future might be. Meanwhile, Daniel Salazar remained close, offering support and making sure Clara felt comfortable at every step. Clara's office was located in the same building as Daniel's, which allowed them to stay in touch easily. However, as the weeks progressed, Clara began to feel the atmosphere in the office becoming more tense. Co-workers, who had previously seemed to treat her in a friendly manner, now showed a somewhat aloof attitude. He didn't understand why, but there was something in the air that seemed different to him. One morning, after a meeting, Clara decided to approach Andrés Castillo, one of her closest colleagues. He was someone I trusted, and with whom I used to share a coffee during breaks. He had always been kind and supportive of her in the past. Perhaps, Clara thought, Andrés could explain to her what was happening. "Andrés, can I talk to you for a moment?" asked Clara as she approached her desk. Andrés looked up and smiled when he saw her. "Sure, Clara. What's wrong?" Clara sat across from him, trying to find the right words. "I don't know if it's just my impression, but lately I feel like something has changed here. Things are not as they used to be. Maybe I'm wrong, but I get the feeling that people are avoiding me." Andrew frowned, looking around as if to make sure no one was listening. Then, with a serious expression, he began to speak in a low voice. "You're not wrong. I've noticed the same thing. The truth is that there are some who don't know how to handle your pregnancy. Some feel uncomfortable, as if it's something out of place here. And even if they don't say it openly, the situation is creating a bit of tension." Clara felt a knot in her stomach when she heard his words. How could it be that something so personal could generate so much discomfort? I didn't expect the reactions to be so intense. "Why do they react like this?" asked Clara, confused. "I don't want my pregnancy to cause problems. I didn't ask for this." "It's not your fault, Clara," Andrew replied sincerely. "It's just that some people aren't prepared for changes like that, especially in an environment as competitive as this. Maybe they think you won't be able to handle everything, or that it won't be fair to the team. But what really matters is what you decide to do." Clara remained thoughtful, processing what Andrés had said. I knew he was right about a lot of things. Not everyone could understand the situation from their perspective. At that moment, She realized that the decision to continue working or take a break was no longer up to her, but to how others would see it. "I don't know what to do, Andrew," Clara murmured, looking down at his hands. "I feel like I'm caught between my future and what's expected of me here. I've been told I can keep working, but can I really?" "Only you know that, Clara," Andres told her, placing a hand on her shoulder in support. "What matters is that you are well. Here, what others think is not what counts. What matters most is your well-being." Clara nodded slowly, feeling a mixture of uncertainty and gratitude. She knew that the road ahead would be complicated, but at least she no longer felt so alone in her internal struggle. As the days passed, Clara could not stop thinking about Andres's words. Every time he looked at his desk or greeted his colleagues, the feeling of discomfort seemed to intensify. She felt that the place that had once been familiar and welcoming to her was now filled with furtive glances and comments behind her. Although he tried to ignore it, his mind couldn't stop thinking about the situation. One afternoon, after a particularly stressful day, Clara decided to meet with Daniel Salazar. She knew that he had been there from the beginning, offering support and advice, and she trusted his judgment. "I needed to talk to someone who understood what was going on, someone who could give me a different perspective." They met at a nearby cafe, where the relaxed atmosphere allowed them to speak more freely. Clara took a sip of her drink before starting. "Daniel, I need to know if I'm doing the right thing. This situation is starting to affect me more than I thought. I don't want pregnancy to become an obstacle, but I also don't want them to continue to look at me as if I were making the wrong decision." Daniel looked at her with understanding and took a moment before answering. "Clara, what you are experiencing is not easy. People sometimes don't understand how to handle change, and what's happening to you is something completely new to many here. But what I do know is that you are capable of handling it. The important thing is that you don't let others decide what's best for you. Only you know what's right." Clara sighed, feeling a slight pressure in her chest. "I know. But I'm afraid that if I go ahead with my pregnancy, my career will be affected. All eyes are on me now, and I can't help but feel that something is going to change forever." Daniel stared at her with a serious expression. "I understand you, but I also think you have to be true to yourself. It's not about what others think, it's about what you want. If you feel like you can get on with your work, do it. If you need to take some time, do that too. Just because you're pregnant doesn't define you as a professional, Clara. You're still the same talented person you've always been." Those words touched his heart. Clara was more relieved to hear someone so close to her say that she shouldn't be carried away by what others thought. Even so, the pressure was still present. When he returned to the office, he realized that the situation had become even more complex. Some companions treated her with a polite distance, while others showed her sympathy but did not really know what to say. One afternoon, while walking through the corridors of the office, Clara met Andres. He was talking to a group of colleagues, but as soon as he saw her, he signaled for her to come closer. Clara walked toward him, feeling a strange mixture of discomfort and relief at the same time. "Clara," Andres said in a low tone, "I've heard some things. I know it's not easy, but I want you to know that you're not alone in this. Some people have a hard time understanding that things can change, and that pregnancy isn't something you should hide. I've talked to some of them, and I've made it clear that your personal life shouldn't interfere with your work." Clara looked at him in surprise. "What did you tell them?" Andres smiled slightly. "I told them that everyone has the right to decide how to lead their life, and that, as co-workers, we must respect that. No one should make you feel uncomfortable about something so natural." Andrew's words brought him unexpected comfort. While there was still a long way to go, feeling that someone was willing to support her in that way gave her strength to keep going. However, Clara's internal conflict did not disappear. The more time passed, the more convinced he became that he would need to make a decision about his professional future. Could she continue at her job while dealing with her pregnancy? Or would it be better to focus entirely on your health and well-being, putting work aside temporarily? On a rainy afternoon, Clara sat at her desk, staring out the window with a blank mind. The pressure was beginning to take hold of her. She thought about the conversation with Daniel and Andrew, and how they had both given her the confidence to make a decision for herself. But I still felt the weight of uncertainty. She knew pregnancy wouldn't change who she was as a person, but the expectations of others, the demands of her job, and the thought of being judged kept her stuck in a spiral of doubt. That's when Daniel called her for one last meeting before the end of the workday. "Clara, I want you to think about this. Your career doesn't have to be defined by your pregnancy, but it also doesn't have to follow the same path if you decide that now is the time to take a break. No one can tell you what's best for you. Only you have the answer." Clara, though still full of doubts, felt that Daniel's words were a respite. Maybe, just maybe, she could find the balance between being a mother and maintaining her career. She just needed to make the decision on her own, without pressure or expectations from outsiders. The following Monday, Clara arrived at the office with a strange feeling. Although he had had a quiet weekend to reflect on his options, the weight of uncertainty was still present. She had spoken to Daniel about her doubts and how the pressure of keeping her job while going through this delicate time in her life was draining her emotionally. At the same time, the idea of leaving everything behind seemed like an impossible option. As she sat down at her desk, Clara noticed that some coworkers looked at her differently. Their appearance wasn't necessarily hostile, but there was something in their eyes that made her feel like she was being watched in a way she wasn't used to. He thought about what Andrew had told him about the importance of standing firm. "Don't let what others think affect you, Clara," he had insisted. That morning, as if the universe were sending him a signal, a letter arrived at his desk without a return address. When she opened it, she found a message that left her speechless. She said, "I know you feel isolated. Don't worry, things will get better, but only if you allow yourself to be yourself." Clara looked at the letter carefully, wondering who could have sent it. But instead of feeling anxious, she experienced a sense of relief. Something in those words seemed to be telling her that she was not alone, even though she did not yet fully understand who had been responsible for that message. She decided that she was not going to be carried away by the pressure and would continue to be true to herself. When Richard Collins, her boss, walked into the office that morning, Clara realized she hadn't seen him in days. It was strange because he used to be in constant communication with the whole team, but since he had given the news of her pregnancy, his boss seemed to be absent, as if avoiding any kind of deep conversation about her future. Clara noticed that her boss seemed uncomfortable looking her straight in the eye. "Clara, how are you?" Richard asked, in an almost forced way, as if he were searching for the right words but not really knowing what to say. Clara felt uneasy at his tone and decided to be completely honest, as she had always been. "I'm fine, Richard. Thanks for asking. I've just been thinking a lot about all of this, and I'd like to know what you think. I know things are changing, and that can be hard to process." Richard nodded slowly, apparently still a little uncomfortable. "Well, Clara, we all have our worries, right? I understand that this change may be meaningful to you, but I think the most important thing is that you remain the same person we knew. I don't want you to feel pressured to do anything you don't want to do. You know you can always count on me." Although Richard's words were kind, Clara couldn't help but feel that he wasn't completely honest with her. Was he really supporting her, or was he just being diplomatic because he didn't know how to handle the situation? That question kept hovering in his mind as he left. From that moment on, Clara began to observe more closely the interactions between her coworkers. There was a subtle change, almost imperceptible, but palpable. It was as if, despite the smiles and kind gestures, he felt disconnected. Some people no longer greeted her in the same way, as if they were afraid of saying the wrong thing. Others rather treated her with excessive gentleness, as if she were made of glass. The discomfort was accumulating more and more every day. He decided that he needed to talk to Andres again. He had always been a good friend and someone I could trust, without fearing judgment. He sent her a message to meet in the same cafe where they had spoken earlier, and soon they were sitting in front of a cup of coffee, the calm atmosphere in the background helping Clara to speak more freely. "Andres, I think I'm losing control over all this," Clara began, looking at her cup of coffee. "People seem to treat me differently, and I don't know what to expect from them anymore. It's like everyone is waiting for me to make a mistake, or to fall behind." Andres looked at her attentively, his eyes full of empathy. "Clara, what is happening is not easy. People are sometimes afraid of what they don't understand. And I'm not going to lie to you. Some people may not know how to react to these kinds of changes, but that doesn't mean you should change, or that you should fit into something that doesn't belong to you. Clara nodded, but the uncertainty continued to sink in. How do I not feel out of place, so that I don't feel like everyone is watching me with a magnifying glass? Andrew took a long breath before answering. The first thing you have to do is be yourself. Don't let the expectations of others drag you into something you don't want. This moment is yours, and no one can take that away from you. People are going to talk, they're going to speculate, but what really matters is what you decide to do with this time. If you decide to stay, if you decide to take some time, or even if you decide to make a change, that will be your decision. But don't let others dictate what you should do. Andres' words penetrated Clara deeply. Despite her fears and the doubts that continued to haunt her, she understood that she could not let the comments and attitudes of others define her life. No one could tell her what was best for her, except herself. That same afternoon, Clara returned to work with renewed determination. It was clear to her that she could no longer let the opinion of others dictate her life. Her pregnancy was already an undeniable reality, and although it was a significant change, it also represented a new stage, an opportunity to reinvent herself. Why be so afraid of the opinions of others if this was their time? The atmosphere in the office that afternoon seemed even more tense than usual. The whispers among the coworkers increased as she passed by them, and Clara noticed that their presence elicited quick, silent glances. He didn't know if those murmurs came from genuine concern or morbidity, but he didn't care as much as before. She decided that she would not let that affect her. Let them speak what they want, he thought. The only thing that matters is how I feel. Clara took a short break and went out to the balcony of the building to breathe some fresh air. As she looked into the distance, something inside her began to clear. I'm going to do what's best for me, not what others expect. It's time to step up to what I want, without fear. But despite his decision, the pressure didn't go away completely. As soon as he returned to his desk, he saw an email from Richard in his inbox, and when he opened it, he found some words that seemed to be full of concern, although also somewhat distant. Clara, I want to talk to you about your situation. We need to discuss the next steps and how we can make sure you can get on with your work effectively. I'm sure everything can be handled, but we need to make a few things clear. Those words did not reassure her, but increased her anxiety. What did he mean by setting some things straight? Clara interpreted this as a hint that she was about to be displaced, or that her position in the company would be compromised. That kind of ambiguous messaging made her feel like she wasn't getting the support she needed. The next morning, Clara decided to confront Richard once and for all. I no longer wanted to be subject to that kind of uncertainty. He knew that if he didn't take control, the situation would only get worse. So when she arrived at work, she asked for a meeting with him. The appointment was at his office, a place that normally didn't scare him, but this time he felt different. The air seemed denser, as if everything was about to change. When Clara entered, Richard greeted her with a tense smile, and Clara couldn't help but notice that her eyes avoided his. Was there something I wasn't telling him? Clara, I'm glad you requested this meeting. As I mentioned in the email, there are a few things we need to discuss about your role here in the company. As you know, this is a very demanding job, and circumstances can get complicated. Richard seemed to be searching for the right words, but Clara wasn't going to let his nervousness get to her. I understand, Richard, but I want to be clear too. My pregnancy doesn't mean I'm ready to quit my career or that my commitment to work is going to change. I'm willing to keep going, as long as I'm given the opportunities to do so. Richard was silent for a moment. I wasn't prepared for Clara's frankness. Most people in the office, despite the rumors, had been more accommodating or evasive. But Clara didn't have time for beating around the bush. What I mean is that this job can involve a lot of stress, Clara. You know that the demands don't stop. If you can't meet deadlines or expectations, you'll need to consider other alternatives. Hearing those words, Clara felt a knot in her stomach. Was Richard insinuating that he would not be able to fulfill his responsibilities? But she wasn't going to let that intimidate her. He looked at his boss firmly and replied, I'll take responsibility for my work, Richard. I'm not asking to be given preferential treatment, just to be given the space to do it properly. Pregnancy is not a weakness, and I'm not going to let it look like one." Richard watched her silently, as if he were evaluating her words. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, Clara, I will take that into account. I need you to know that this is not easy for anyone. Work is important, but your health and well-being come first. I will try to find a solution that is reasonable for everyone." Clara left the office with a mixture of feelings. Although she had managed to get Richard to understand her point of view, she could not shake the feeling that there was still something else he had not told her. Was he really giving her a chance? Or was he looking for an excuse to part ways with her? Throughout the day, Clara thought about what she had talked about with Andres, about how she herself should be responsible for her future. The uncertainty about his work remained, but now he was not going to allow the decision of others to define his path. He decided that regardless of what Richard or his companions thought, he was going to take control of his life and his decisions. That same afternoon, she decided to call Daniel to tell him how the meeting had gone. I needed their support more than ever. "Daniel, I need to talk to you. I had a meeting with Richard today, and things didn't go as I expected. She said that even though my pregnancy isn't a problem, I should be willing to adapt to the changes. But I don't know what to think. I don't want to be seen as someone who can't do my best." Daniel's voice on the other end of the line was calm but firm. "Clara, this is just the beginning. Don't get caught up in what others might think. Your worth doesn't depend on what others believe. If you decide to stay in that job, make sure you get what you need. If you decide to quit, it's also valid. You're in control." Those words echoed in his mind. Clara understood that it wasn't just about her work, but about how she saw her life at the time. Most importantly, he wasn't going to let the opinions of others define his future. As the days went by, Clara began to notice more changes in her environment. Although she had taken a firm stance in front of Richard, the tension in the office was still simmering. Every time she walked into a meeting or walked across the hallway, she felt the gazes of her coworkers, some filled with compassion, some with curiosity, but most of all, the sense that she was being watched more than ever. Did his teammates think he was going to fail? Or worse, that her pregnancy would make her a burden? The stress was starting to pile up. The tasks did not diminish, and Clara still felt that she had to show that she could still do her best, despite the circumstances. Every time she sat at her desk, she found herself going over and over project deadlines, as if she could somehow keep the pressure from getting the hell out of her. However, he could not deny that the constant worry was beginning to affect his well-being. At the end of each day, his shoulders felt heavy, and his mind was exhausted. She knew she needed to find a way to balance the demands of her job with the challenges of her pregnancy, but she wasn't sure how to do it. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult day, Clara decided that she needed a break. He went home with the idea of relaxing and disconnecting a little from everything. When she arrived, she found her friend Isabel waiting for her, as always, with a cup of hot tea ready to offer her. "Clara, how's everything going? I see you exhausted." Isabel watched her with a worried look, knowing what Clara had been facing at work. Clara slumped down on the sofa, letting out a deep sigh. "I'm exhausted, Isabel. Everything is being more difficult than I thought. I feel like everyone is watching me, waiting for me to fall. Richard is not as clear as I would like, and my colleagues, I don't know. It seems that they are waiting for me to leave. Every day is a challenge." Isabel nodded in understanding and sat down next to her. "I understand what you're going through, Clara, but don't let others make you feel like you can't do it. I know you have everything you need to balance your life and move forward. People will always have something to say, but that doesn't define your ability." Clara looked at her friend with gratitude. "I know, but sometimes I feel like I'm walking a tightrope, and every step I take could be the one that makes me fall. I don't want to let myself down, but I'm also afraid that things will get too complicated. Remember that you have the right to make decisions that favor you. Don't let anyone make you feel like your pregnancy is a hindrance. On the contrary, it is a time to reaffirm your strength, Clara. And if the job gets too stressful, you can always take another tack. It's not wrong to change direction if it brings you peace." Isabel gave her an encouraging smile, but Clara couldn't help but feel insecure. Should I really leave it all behind? Was that the solution? Something inside her told her that it was not yet time to give up, but she also understood that a balance had to be found between personal and professional life. The next day, Clara decided to seek Daniel's advice. He needed an outside perspective, something that could offer him clear guidance. Although he did not tell her everything he had talked about with Isabel, he did share his growing anxiety. "Daniel, I feel like I'm on the verge of a breakdown. Everyone expects me to be able to keep up, but I'm starting to doubt if I can do it. I want to be there for my baby, but I also want to show that I'm still valuable to the company. I'm caught between those two worlds." Daniel, who had always been a good friend, listened intently before answering. "Clara, you're not trapped. What happens is that you are at a crossroads, and that is normal. You don't have to sacrifice any part of yourself to please others. If work is overwhelming you, then you have to be honest with yourself and make decisions that don't wear you down." Those words struck a chord with Clara. I knew he was right, but the fear of making the wrong decision was still present. What if when he left work he regretted it? But at the same time, the constant stress didn't let her think clearly. "Maybe I need a break, right?" he asked himself in a low voice. "A break doesn't mean giving up, Clara. Sometimes what you need is to take a step back and then move forward with more strength. The important thing is that you don't lose yourself in the process." When she returned home that afternoon, Clara thought about everything she had talked about with Isabel and Daniel. He realized that his fear of change was clouded by the fear of other people's judgment. Instead of accepting that her situation might require a readjustment, she had been trying to meet expectations that didn't serve her. Why go along with the flow of others if that was draining her so much? Over the next few days, Clara began to make firmer decisions. She was no longer going to let the pressures of work or her boss's comments get the better of her. He decided to talk to Richard again, this time to clarify his terms and set clear boundaries. The meeting was not easy, but Clara was determined to express what she felt. "Richard, I want to be honest with you. While I'm willing to continue contributing to the company, I need you to respect my time and my health. My pregnancy should not be seen as a weakness, and if I can't deliver on everything that is expected of me, I need you to understand and give me the support I need to continue without putting my well-being at risk." Richard stared at her for a long time before speaking. Although his expression was still serious, Clara noticed a change in his tone. "I understand you, Clara. I think that sometimes we do not take into account what a change as big as the one you are experiencing implies. My intention was never to make you feel pressured. From now on, we will look for a way for you to continue without putting yourself in an untenable situation." As she left the meeting, Clara felt a relief she hadn't experienced in weeks. She didn't know exactly what the future would hold, but she knew she had taken an important step toward a balance that would allow her to move forward with her life and pregnancy the way she wanted. Now, she just had to be patient and trust herself. As the weeks went by, Clara found a new rhythm in her life, although it was not easy. The pressure to balance her pregnancy with work demands continued, but with the support of Isabel, Daniel, and the new boundaries she had established with Richard, she felt more empowered. Even though she still faced days of uncertainty, Clara began to find comfort in the small advances she made each day. The first few days after her conversation with Richard were tense. The relationship between the two had changed, and Clara began to notice that he treated her with greater understanding. Although the situation wasn't perfect, the fact that Richard had accepted her need for space and boundaries made her feel calmer. However, in the hallways of the office and in meetings, I still felt the curious looks. Not all of his peers seemed to accept his new approach easily. Some followed up with subtle comments, making Clara uncomfortable, but she was no longer willing to let those small criticisms affect her. At times, her colleagues would look at her with that mixture of doubt and compassion, as if somehow her pregnancy had placed her in a vulnerable position. But Clara realized that she didn't need validation from others to feel capable of fulfilling her responsibilities. One afternoon, after a particularly hard day, Clara decided to take some time for herself. She needed to disconnect from everything and reconnect with her deepest feelings. He headed to a small cafe he used to visit when he wanted to escape the routine, a quiet place where he could sit and reflect without the pressure of the outside world. There, with a cup of hot coffee in her hands, Clara allowed herself to think about everything that had happened so far. As she watched the coffee slowly spill into her cup, Clara thought about her future, the baby inside her, and the decisions she still had to make. How will everything change when I'm born? He wondered, as he watched the people passing by the window. Some seemed to be in a hurry, others were walking calmly. The world is on its course while I struggle to find my place in it, she thought, feeling a mixture of anxiety and hope. In the midst of these thoughts, a young woman approached his table. Clara recognized her, even though she hadn't had many interactions with her. It was Vanessa, a colleague who worked in another department. "Can I sit down?" Vanessa asked with a shy smile. Clara nodded, inviting her to take a seat. Vanessa settled in front of her, staring at the cup of coffee. "Sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to talk to you. I've noticed that you've been dealing with a lot lately. And, well, I don't know if it's happened to you, but sometimes I feel like pregnancy somehow puts women in a position where everyone judges them, whether it's for better or worse." Clara looked at her carefully, surprised by Vanessa's empathy. "It's true," Clara said, "but sometimes I feel like no one understands what I'm really going through. Like I don't have the right to feel vulnerable." Vanessa nodded, her face reflecting deep understanding. "I think a lot of times people have preconceived ideas about what a pregnant woman should do, as if everything in her life has to be perfect, as if her pregnancy is the only thing that defines who she is. But this is not the case. You are much more than that, Clara." Those words touched Clara in a profound way. She had never before considered that perhaps societal expectations about pregnancy were more related to others than to herself. "Sometimes I feel that people see me as a project to follow, as if everything I do now is judged and compared to what is expected of me." Vanessa looked at her with a calm smile. "It's easy to fall into that trap, but the important thing is what you think of yourself. You're strong, Clara, and your value doesn't depend on how others see you." Clara pondered those words as Vanessa got up to leave. The young woman patted him on the shoulder before leaving behind a sense of peace in Clara. For the first time in a long time, he felt that external charges didn't have to determine his value. Maybe it's time to stop worrying about what others think, he thought as he finished his coffee. That night, when she got home, Clara shared her reflection with Isabel. "Today I spoke with Vanessa in the cafe. It made me realize something important. I don't need to follow the expectations of others. My worth is not measured by what others think of me." Isabel smiled approvingly. "I'm glad to hear that, Clara. You know you have everything you need to get ahead. The world sometimes puts us in difficult situations, but what really matters is how you deal with them." Clara felt that little by little she was beginning to see things differently. Although there were still challenges to be faced, something inside of her had changed. She was no longer afraid of being judged for her pregnancy or the choices she would make in her personal life. She knew she would have to learn to navigate difficulties, but she also understood that the path to inner peace began with accepting herself. The next day, Clara returned to work with renewed energy. "Although the challenges were still present, I knew I could handle situations with a fresh perspective." When Richard called her into his office to discuss some details about a project, Clara felt more prepared than ever to express what she thought and how her personal decisions also influenced her professional ability. "Richard, I've been reflecting a lot on my situation, and I want to make sure that both my pregnancy and my job can coexist in a healthy way. I don't want stress to get to me, but I also want to continue doing what I'm passionate about in the company. How can we make this work in a balanced way?" Richard looked at her seriously, but also in a softer tone than in their last conversation. "Clara, I appreciate you saying it. I am willing to support you in this. The important thing is that you remain part of this team and find a way to handle everything. We'll see how we can redistribute responsibilities to make you feel more comfortable." As she left Richard's office, Clara felt more relieved. She knew there was still much to do, but she also understood that the path to real balance would require honesty, both with herself and with others. He had to continue to trust in his ability to adapt and grow without losing sight of what really mattered: his health, his well-being, and his future. The days went on with the same speed as always, but Clara felt that there was something new in her. As the weeks progressed, his body changed, his mind adapted, and his professional environment did too, although much more slowly. As her maternity date approached, Clara began making the necessary preparations for her maternity leave. However, even with that process ahead, something inside him told him that there was more at stake than simply fulfilling his professional responsibilities. Despite the emotional burden of being pregnant and facing the judgments of others, Clara realized that something had begun to set her free. The certainty that she could be a mother and a professional, that she did not have to choose between one or the other, but that she could have both. Sure, I knew it wouldn't be easy. It would not be an unobstructed road, but she was determined not to let her personal doubts or the expectations of others stop her. She no longer saw herself as someone who had to justify herself. The fear that had previously invaded her began to dissipate little by little. In work meetings, Richard had begun to show a more understanding attitude, and although his professional approach was still demanding, Clara felt that she could approach challenges with a renewed perspective. The important thing is to find balance, he thought as he organized his schedule for the coming week. Sometimes, she thought about how her colleagues looked at her, but she no longer felt vulnerable to those looks. The confidence she had cultivated in herself began to eclipse the insecurities of the past. Isabel was still his rock. Whenever Clara felt exhausted or lost, she found comfort in her friend's wise words. "Remember that you don't have to do it all alone, Clara," Isabel had told her in one of their recent conversations. "The most important thing is that you take care of yourself and what really matters to you. The rest will come." With that wisdom in mind, Clara began to visualize her future more clearly. The day of her maternity leave was near, but before that moment came, there was an important meeting that she didn't want to pass up. Although stress was on the rise, Clara felt that she had mastered what was most difficult for her, making her voice heard. At the meeting, he presented his proposal for a project that he had been developing for weeks and that could give an innovative twist to the company. He did so with such clarity and confidence that everyone present was impressed by his ability to manage his personal and professional life at the same time. When Richard finally thanked her for her input, Clara felt a mixture of pride and satisfaction. Although he could not yet foresee all the obstacles that would arise, he was certain that he was no longer afraid to face the challenges that came his way. The struggle to find the balance between her personal and professional life no longer seemed like a titanic task. Although the fears were still present, she felt that she had learned to face them, and that her future did not depend on the opinions of others. For the first time in a long time, Clara felt truly in control of her life. When he got home that night, he lay down on the couch with a cup of tea and thought about how far he had come. The journey wasn't over yet, but she felt prepared for whatever was coming. He knew there would be difficult times, but he also understood that with each step, each day that passed, he was closer to finding his true peace and purpose. The next day dawned with a fresh air, as if the sun had decided to give Clara a break. After a particularly grueling week, I was ready for a day off, though not before checking out a few things in the office. Although motherhood was on the horizon, the workload remained the same, and anxiety about the projects that remained to be completed was a weight that was hard to ignore. However, Clara began to realize that she could handle those responsibilities with a lighter mindset, without the constant pressure of perfection that had previously weighed her down. In the midst of that whirlwind of thoughts, she thought about her baby, the arrival of that little being that she did not yet know, but who already occupied a privileged place in her heart. The idea of becoming a mother filled her with excitement, but also with uncertainty. I had never imagined that it would be so difficult to balance external expectations with what you really wanted for your personal life. There were days when I thought maybe I should leave everything behind, get away from the office, and dedicate herself to being a full-time mom. However, she couldn't help but feel connected to her work, the people she had built relationships with, and the dreams she hadn't fulfilled yet. The idea of giving up that part of herself wasn't something she could do, at least not without first struggling to find a solution that would allow her to have it all. In the office, things were starting to take shape in a way that seemed almost surreal to him. Richard, as always, was busy with his own projects, but Clara felt that her relationship with him had changed. He was more human, less distant. When he presented him with his final proposal for the next quarter, he saw a slight smile of approval on his face. "Good job, Clara," he said as he reviewed the details. "This approach is what we need." That approval meant more than he imagined. Clara knew that, in some way, she was proving that being a woman in her position, pregnant and determined, did not make her less capable. On the contrary, it gave him more strength to move forward. Despite the small achievements, Clara did not stop thinking about what awaited her once she went on leave. Time was running out, and although her heart was divided, she knew that motherhood must be her priority at that moment. At times, she found herself thinking about her future life as a mother, what it might mean returning to work after childbirth, adjusting to her new routine, and how her work relationships would change. The uncertainty about what was to come filled her with anxiety, but also with a renewed determination. She knew that time would not stand still, and that she would have to adapt to changes, as she always had. Isabel, always so present in her life, was the first to notice the changes. When Clara told him about her day, she couldn't help but smile. "You already have everything under control, Clara. I know this baby will change a lot of things, but I also know that you will handle it as you always have, with strength and wisdom." Isabel's words comforted her, and for a moment, Clara felt that everything that was happening had a greater purpose, that perhaps she was being prepared for something she did not yet fully understand. However, as time passed, Clara could not ignore the small signs from her body that indicated that motherhood was fast approaching. Their energy began to wane earlier in the day, and moments of rest became more and more necessary. Although the excitement for the baby continued to grow, the fatigue was also present. It wasn't easy, but Clara had learned to listen to her body, to understand its limits, and to accept that she couldn't always keep up with the same frenetic pace she was used to. Rest was not a sign of weakness, but a tool to prepare for the future. The following week, Clara was at a crossroads of emotions. The growing sense that something big was about to happen kept her alert, but it also gave her a sense of inner peace. I had made the decision to talk to Richard once again, to make sure that his transition to maternity leave was as smooth as possible. Although her boss had been understanding throughout, Clara felt the need to convey her deepest thoughts, though she couldn't share with anyone else in the office. On the day the appointment with Richard arrived, Clara calmly prepared herself, taking a deep breath before entering her office. She knew it was the right time to do it, and she didn't want her emotions to get the better of her. When she walked into Richard's office, he looked at her with a gentle smile, and for a moment, Clara felt supported. "How are you, Clara?" "All right," Richard asked, seeing the slight tiredness on his face. "I'm fine, but I wanted to talk to you about the leave," Clara said bluntly. "I wanted to be clear and direct. I'm at that point where I need to make sure everything is well covered. I don't want you to miss the rhythm of work while you're gone." Richard nodded in understanding, and then, with an attitude that Clara interpreted as a mixture of respect and concern, he said, "Don't worry about it. We know this is important to you, and your well-being is our priority. We've been preparing to cover your responsibilities while you're away, but we want you to take the time you need. I don't want you to feel pressured." Richard's words were a balm for Clara. He felt a surge of relief, but also a certain gratitude for the work environment he had managed to build over the years. That empathy from her boss comforted her and motivated her to continue fighting to find the balance between her two worlds, personal and professional. The conversation continued, and Clara was able to share her thoughts on her future in the office and how she planned to adjust to returning after motherhood. Richard gave her space to express her fears, her doubts, and her plans. What impressed Clara most was the understanding Richard showed, as if he himself had experienced firsthand the need to find balance in a world that was not always kind to women who chose to become mothers. At the end of the meeting, Clara felt safer. He knew that his work was in good hands, but he also understood that this would be a transition period that would require effort and patience. It wasn't going to be easy, but I felt that, at least for now, I had everything I needed to face what was coming. And most importantly, she could focus on what really mattered, the arrival of her son. Over the next few days, Clara began to notice small changes in her body that reminded her that motherhood was getting closer and closer. She could no longer ignore the discomfort, bloating, and fatigue that accompanied her pregnancy. However, what worried her most was not the physical, but the feeling that her life was going to change in an irreversible way. The idea of becoming a mother excited her deeply, but it also terrified her. She was searching for answers to questions she had never considered before. What would life be like after the baby? How would their priorities be rearranged? Would he be able to maintain harmony between his career and his family? Although her maternal instinct had been strongly awakened, insecurities were beginning to surface. Clara didn't want to be seen as a woman who couldn't handle both, but she also feared that motherhood would change the way she was perceived in the office. Isabel, her closest friend, became her confidant. He visited her every day, offering words of support, but also sharing stories about his own experience. Isabel had been a mother a few years ago, and while her life had changed significantly, she had also found ways to move forward with her own personal goals. However, Isabel also warned her that, although she had found a balance, life as a mother was not always easy. "You have to know that there will be difficult days, Clara. Days when you'll feel exhausted and confused. But there will also be moments of pure happiness, those that make you think that everything is worth it," Isabel told her, with a warm smile but also full of sincerity. Clara was grateful for these conversations, but uncertainty continued to lurk. While she was grateful for Isabel's help, she knew that she would ultimately have to make her own decisions and learn to face challenges in her own way. As her pregnancy progressed, the need for a change in her life seemed more apparent than ever. Motherhood was about to become part of her identity in a way she couldn't ignore. One morning, Clara received a message from Richard. The tone was direct and professional, but it also reflected a subtle concern. I wanted to know if Clara had made a final decision on when her leave would begin. I knew the date was near, but I needed to organize everything I needed so that the work wouldn't stop. Clara took a moment to reflect before answering. At first, she thought she could extend her time at the office, but then she remembered what Isabel had told her about the importance of listening to her body. The fatigue was already evident, and she herself felt that she had to begin to disconnect from the demands of work. "I'm going to take my leave next week, Richard. I think it's the best thing for me right now. I've organized everything I can, and I know the team will be in good hands." The message was simple, but for Clara, it was an important step. Accepting that she needed to take a break hadn't been easy, but at the time the decision felt right. When she sent the message, Clara felt a mixture of relief and fear. It was a new stage, but also a chapter in which, finally, he could accept his vulnerability. Life, in the end, was made of transitions, and although you couldn't always foresee what was to come, I was certain that I was ready for anything. As the date of her discharge approached, Clara felt more and more calm. Although the first few weeks of pregnancy had been an emotional roller coaster, she had now reached a kind of acceptance. She knew she had made the right decision in preparing for her baby's arrival. However, something was still on his mind. Conversations with Isabel had made it clear to her that motherhood was not something that could be easily compartmentalized. Being a mother was not only a physical change, but it implied a profound change in identity. One afternoon, after receiving a call from her sister Valeria, Clara became pensive as she looked out the window of her apartment. Valeria had been a mother 2 years ago, and although she adored her, Clara had always felt that she was carrying out her motherhood in a much simpler way. In their conversation, Valeria had given her advice that resonated with her deeply. "You don't have to be a superwoman, Clara. You don't have to do everything perfectly. Perfection doesn't exist, and if you try to be that woman, you're going to lose yourself." Valeria's words gave her a kind of tacit permission to relax her expectations of herself. Motherhood was not a career, nor was it an achievement that could be measured in hours of work or in the number of tasks completed. Motherhood was something deeper, something that transformed every part of her being. And now, with the date of her discharge approaching, Clara felt that this change was more than inevitable. It was something I had to embrace. The following days were a whirlwind of farewells. Clara had to make sure that all the projects she had been involved in were delivered on time, and although she did not like to delegate, she understood that it was time to do so. Every meeting, every message, every to-do seemed to remind her that her life, as she knew it, was about to change forever. In the office, his coworkers began to notice his progressive absence. Clara had been working a lot of overtime over the past few weeks to make sure everything was in order before she left. As her pregnancy progressed, so did her tiredness. There were days when she could barely stay awake, and others when she simply wished she was home, resting. However, the work was something he had always taken very seriously. She had never wanted to be seen as the employee who was going to be absent due to her pregnancy. But little by little, she realized that her well-being had to come first. The last day he was in the office before his leave was bittersweet. Clara said goodbye to each of her colleagues with a smile, but also with a slight feeling of sadness. Although the work had given him satisfaction, what awaited him on the other side was much more meaningful. The idea of becoming a mother filled her with excitement, but it also intimidated her. When the day came, Clara woke up early, as she did on quieter days. He didn't want to rush, but he also didn't want time to pass too quickly. She spent an hour in front of the mirror, carefully choosing what she would wear. I didn't want that last day at the office to be just another day. I wanted to remember every moment, every conversation, and every smile shared. Upon arriving at the office, she was greeted by a barrage of congratulations and well wishes. There was something in the air that morning that made her feel more loved than she imagined. Although some people seemed excited about his break, there was also a palpable sense of respect for his dedication and effort throughout the time he was working there. Clara had built a reputation in her company as a professional and committed woman, and she felt that her co-workers appreciated that. "Are you ready for the next chapter?" asked Andres, a close colleague who had worked with her for years. Clara smiled, although she couldn't help but feel nervous inside. I wasn't sure if she would ever feel ready for what was coming, but I knew the time was right. She had been preparing everything for months, and now she was ready to take the next step. That afternoon, after saying goodbye to everyone, Clara returned to her apartment and lay down on the sofa. She closed her eyes, letting the silence envelop her. For the first time in weeks, I had no urgent tasks, no emails to answer. It was a bittersweet feeling, but also liberating. Although worries were still on her mind, she knew it was time to disconnect from the pressures of work. Suddenly his phone rang. It was a call from Richard. Although she had spoken to him earlier that morning, Clara knew that he felt committed to her well-being and did not hesitate to call her to make sure everything was okay. "I just wanted to make sure you're okay, Clara. If at any time you need anything, don't hesitate to tell me. I'm sure the team will be fine without you, but I care that you're calm and enjoy this time." Richard's words made her smile. Although she couldn't deny that she was going to miss the routine of work, her boss's support made her feel like she had made the right decision. Motherhood was not a break in itself, but it certainly gave her the opportunity to connect with a new facet of her life. The next month passed quickly. Clara was at home, resting, preparing for the arrival of her baby. Although I felt a mixture of anxiety and excitement, I had also begun to enjoy the calm that came with being away from work. Each day, he took a moment to reflect on how he had gotten here. Sometimes he thought about everything he had left behind to start this new stage, but at other times, he felt at peace with his decision. The conversations with Isabel and Valeria continued, and Clara shared with them the small surprises and new emotions that came with each week of pregnancy. Sometimes the little worries would melt away when I shared them with them. Clara knew that although the road ahead was not going to be easy, she was not alone in her journey. Time continued its march, and by the end of the second month of pregnancy, Clara felt in a kind of limbo between the old world and the new one she was about to discover. She was away from the office, yes, but her mind was still occupied with the decision she had made. Whenever she was alone, in her quiet moments, she reflected on what she left behind. Would the time be enough to prepare to be a mother? Was she really ready for the sacrifices that would entail? The doubts were still there, but little by little, the certainty that he had taken the right path began to surface. There were days when she was completely overcome with emotion, days when she felt a deep connection with her baby, and days when the anxiety of the unknown took hold of her. Sometimes, when he walked in the park or sat on the couch in his apartment with a book in his hands, he felt a calm that allowed him to visualize the future clearly. This rest, although unexpected and with its own doubts, offered her a unique opportunity to find herself again. It was during those moments of introspection that Clara began to understand the value of motherhood in her life. It wasn't just about giving birth or raising a child. It was an opportunity to reconfigure themselves as a person, to redefine their identity and their purpose in life. The weeks passed and Clara was more and more prepared, not only physically, but also emotionally and mentally, for the arrival of her son. Preparation for your baby began in a hands-on way. She had visited some clothing and baby supply stores, and although shopping seemed like a chore at first, It soon became a fun and emotional time. Choosing small sets of clothes, furniture, and toys, Clara began to imagine what life would be like with her baby. Although the birth was still a long way off, each day of preparation connected her more to the idea of what was to come. However, the idea of being a mother still seemed surreal to her. One afternoon, Clara was in the kitchen making a cup of tea when her phone rang. It was a message from Andres, his co-worker. Although Clara had tried to disconnect from the office entirely, she couldn't help but feel a small twinge of nostalgia when she saw Andrew's name on the screen. In their most recent conversations, he had given her some helpful advice about motherhood, since his wife had had their second child not long ago. Andrew always had a way of making challenges seem less daunting. "Clara, I hope you're getting a lot of rest. I want you to know that we all miss you here. Here's a list of some things for you to think about in the first days with the baby. I think they will come in handy. A hug." Clara smiled, remembering how Andres had been one of the few in the office who had shown real interest in her well-being, not only as a colleague but also as a friend. Although her relationship with other co-workers was cordial, she rarely felt that anyone cared about her beyond the professional. Andrew, however, had always shown genuine empathy. Sometimes that was all he needed. Clara responded to the message by thanking him and assuring him that he was fine. As she did so, she thought about how lucky she felt to have friends like Andrew. Despite her worries and the inevitable insecurities she felt, she knew she wasn't alone in this process. Time passed quickly, and as she entered the third month of pregnancy, Clara began to notice more obvious changes in her body. The first symptoms of pregnancy, such as nausea and tiredness, began to subside. Although there were still times when she felt exhausted, her energy was slowly starting to return. This, along with her growing emotional connection with her baby, made her feel more centered than ever. His mother, always worried, had insisted that he rest as much as possible. Even though Clara had told her she felt fine, there was something about the way her mother looked at her that made her feel a little more vulnerable than she wanted to admit. The conversations with her mother were always the same: advice on how to sleep well, on what foods to avoid, and on how to take it easy. Although Clara appreciated her mother's concern, she sometimes wished her a little more space to do things her own way. One afternoon, while sitting on the couch in her living room, Clara received an unexpected call from Valeria, her sister. Although they maintained a close relationship, sometimes their differences came to the surface. Valeria had a very different way of seeing motherhood, almost idealizing it, while Clara was more cautious and reflective. However, the conversations between them always managed to reassure her, as if Valeria, with her carefree energy, could bring a kind of serenity that Clara needed. "Clara, I'm serious. You don't have to do everything perfectly. You'll see that everything is going to flow. The first months will be hard, but the moments you are going to live, the ones you are going to share with your baby, are going to be the most beautiful thing you have ever experienced." Although she knew Valeria was right, Clara couldn't help but wonder if she would ever really feel ready for what was coming. Motherhood was a roller coaster, and although she already felt the vertigo of what awaited her, she could not help but feel that there was still much to discover. The third month progressed, and Clara began to look for ways to prepare emotionally for motherhood. Although his work had given him much satisfaction, what was to come seemed infinitely more important. She decided to read some books about motherhood, about parenting, and about life after childbirth. At first, she thought reading all of that would be unnecessary, but she soon realized how much she could learn about what her body and mind needed to go through. Although most of the books were focused on the physical, Clara felt that the most important thing was the emotional preparation she had to go through. During her readings, she came across a passage that moved her deeply. Motherhood is not just a physical journey, but a spiritual journey. Being a mother is learning to grow together with your child, without losing your own essence. These words made her think about her own life, about everything she had achieved so far, and what she wanted to pass on to her son. She understood that being a mother did not mean giving up her dreams and desires, but integrating them with those of her baby. Clara got up from the sofa and went to the window. He looked out over the city from his apartment, the same city he had worked in for so many years. The life I had known was about to change, but now I felt that I was more prepared than ever to embrace this new stage. It was no longer just about making practical decisions. It was a matter of accepting what was coming and finding a greater purpose in it. Clara's pregnancy came to an end with a surprising turn of events. It had been 9 months since he began his journey, and with each day, his body and mind had adapted to the new reality. She had learned to listen to her body, to trust her intuition, and most importantly, she had learned to embrace the uncertainty of motherhood. The day of the birth came with the strength and determination of everything that Clara had lived until that moment. Pain, mixed emotions, anxiety and joy were intertwined in an indescribable way. But in the midst of the intensity of those moments, Clara never felt alone. The presence of Andres, her friend and partner, who was there supporting her throughout the process, filled her with calm. When the baby was born, Clara looked into her son's eyes for the first time and felt a connection so deep she couldn't put it into words. The little boy, with his curious eyes and smooth skin, was everything Clara had dreamed of and much more. Suddenly, all the fear I had felt, all the doubts, disappeared. At that moment, Clara understood that the journey of motherhood was not a destination, but a series of moments that were gradually discovered, and I was ready to face them. The return home was another challenge. The first nights were long, with the baby crying, Clara learning to breastfeed and sleeping less than she was used to. But each smile, each look of her son, gave her an energy that she did not know she possessed. In each small achievement, such as soothing her baby or watching him sleep for a few minutes, Clara found a sense of accomplishment that she had not experienced before. As the days went by, Clara began to understand that motherhood was a learning experience. It wasn't perfect, nor was it always easy, but it was full of moments of pure beauty. She learned to trust her gut, to ask for help when she needed it, and to remember that she wasn't alone, even when she felt she was. Andres was still her pillar of support, and the relationship with her mother and sister improved over time, especially when they saw how Clara adapted and grew as a mother. Finally, when her son was 3 months old, Clara realized that life had changed in an unrecognizable but so profoundly positive way. He had grown and changed in ways he didn't expect, and while he didn't have all the answers, he had found his way into this new chapter. She let her baby guide her life in a way that only parents can understand, and it wasn't necessary to have everything figured out. Motherhood, with all its ups and downs, had given her a new perspective on life, on her place in the world, and on what really mattered. One day, while watching her son sleep peacefully in his crib, Clara thought about the future. I didn't know what would come next, but now I felt like I was ready to face it, no matter what. He didn't have all the answers, but he was no longer worried about not having them. She knew that step by step, she would grow alongside her son, and that her life would continue to evolve in ways she could not have imagined. As time went on, Clara continued to learn what it meant to be a mother, while also maintaining her independence and identity as a woman. It wasn't easy, but he found the necessary balance so as not to get lost along the way. In the end, what had started as unexpected news, a surprise that took her by surprise, became the greatest gift of her life. The love she felt for her son was greater than any fear or doubt she had had. Motherhood transformed her in a way she hadn't anticipated, but in which she finally found her true purpose. The story of Clara and her baby was not just a tale of challenges and sacrifices, but a celebration of what it means to love and be loved unconditionally. It was the story of a journey that was not about a destination, but about learning to enjoy the process, with all its ups and downs. And although Clara knew that there were still many difficult moments ahead, she also knew that the beautiful moments, the moments of love and connection, would be enough to guide her, step by step, on her path as a mother.